Okay, so we talk about some of the health aspects. Now talk about some of the consumer changes, which is the aging population. For those of you that haven't noticed, countries all over the world are facing aging populations and reducing birth rates. One of the interesting stats that I just saw on the news yesterday, which made me smile as we're in this, in South Korea they sold more prams for dogs than they did for children last year. Right? It's kind of scary the amount of changes they've got there. Singapore is one of the world's lowest fertility rates, and at the same time, the population is not just aging, but it's aging rapidly. I'm just reading the stats so I get them correct. So in 2010, 1 in 10 were aged 65 and above. In 2020, it's now 1 in 6, and by 2030, 1 in 4 in Singapore will be over 65. Which is kind of scary, the changes there. So for this section, let's hear from Linda from Singapore.
Hi, I'm Linda. After I retired, I often thought about what it would be like to stay healthy as I got older. I've always enjoyed spending time with my grandkids, playing games and being part of their active lives. However, I've noticed that my mobility isn't as good as it used to be, and I sometimes feel limited in what I can do. I want to keep up with them, but I often find myself unable to participate in some of the more active play. When I try exercising to improve my fitness, I often felt weak and experienced significant muscle soreness afterward. Some of my friends suggested that instead of focusing solely on exercise, I should also pay attention to my diet. They encouraged me to eat more protein and fiber-rich foods like tofu, soybeans, and whole grains. At first, I was skeptical, but I decided to give it a try. Surprisingly, incorporating these foods into my meals has made a noticeable difference. I felt more energetic and have even noticed some improvements in my overall well-being. I've always loved fruits and vegetables, not just for their delicious taste, but also for the vitamins and nutrients they provide. I've been making an effort to include more of them in my diet alongside protein during every meal. And I feel good knowing that I'm nourishing my body in a way that supports my health as I age. While I may not have the same level of mobility I once did, I'm learning that there are many ways to maintain my health and enjoy my life to the fullest.
So Oliver, maybe first one here. Like I know from my own grandparents that as older people, as people age, they usually also consume less, and we hear that they need more protein in their diet. Some of the ways that you can add extra protein to smaller portions, basically.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's going to have to do with ingredient selection. I think it's important to note also that people don't necessarily want to be like, nobody wants to be older for like. Everybody wants to be healthy while they're old, rather than older for longer, if that makes sense. Which I think has a lot of ramifications. The idea of getting them more nutrient-dense meals is currently agriculturally a bit sketchy, as we're seeing like globally in agriculture because of soil health being very poor. We see a lot less nutrient density in general in the food that we produce. Like versus the 1970s, what a carrot has in nutritional density now is like roughly 1/3. Spinach is way worse. Peas are awful. Protein in animals tends to remain fairly constant, but I think their protein conversion ratio is obviously poor, and then if the plants that are feeding them, we need more of them to produce a single kilo of beef or pork or whatever it is. So we end up in a scenario where producing more nutrient out of less and less arable land for an older and older population is kind of a series of variables that dictates an impossibility to a degree. There are, there's a nod to, we spoke about this a little bit earlier that I'm afraid of, which is that we get this like pharmaceutical intervention. We already, in my opinion, like feed our elderly way too many pills. And I think that I don't want to see that crossing the line into like okay, you wake up, you take 30 pills. At lunch, instead of food, here's 30 pills. At dinner, instead of food, or maybe you smell this chocolate bar and then you eat 30 pills. That's kind of not ideal. Have any of you seen the video of the Italian grandmother doing that? Like, she's like sniffing a chocolate bar and then eating lettuce. It's so adorable, and you can see she's like really making an effort, and she wants to eat the chocolate super badly. But yeah, I think we're kind of moving in a direction where we need to figure out probably our agricultural systems in order to get the nutrients that we need, not just for the elderly. Obviously, everyone needs good nutrition out of the food they're eating, but especially if we want to stay healthier, older, and not resort to technological or pharmaceutical methods. Yeah.
Thanks, Oliver. And Ange, I guess as fertility rates reduce, people get older, who's going to look after the old people? Like, how is the family group going to work, and what does that look like in terms of how we set up our systems and our cities for an aging population?
Yeah, I was doing the math in my head because you said 1 in 4 people will be elderly,
over 65, yeah.
right? And I was like, okay, how many young people need to support these older folk? And I know for one that the governments are already thinking about the tax system and how much tax they need to apply on young people in order to support the health and the welfare systems that will be needed for the older folk. But I also think there's lots of opportunity here, okay? Because in 1910, our lifespan was 40 years old. It's taken less than a century for us to get to 80. But life hasn't extended at the end. It's actually extended in the middle. So our 40s are actually way more productive than we've ever been. So in that way, I'm actually thinking, and it's already kind of there. They call it the third act, which is once you've kind of go through your career and you're retiring, what do you do with this extra time? Retirement used to be less than a decade before you kind of had to pass away. But now it's going to be 30 years, 40 years, where you're still fairly productive. You have kind of climate crisis coming in. We'll need different things. So one of my propositions for the future is actually, and I'm sure this is not popular, but it's kind of an end-of-life national service, which is we farm, basically. And as you get older, you have to put in some time in the local farms in order to feed the population. And that's, in my mind at least, I'm sure later on you can pull me aside and tell me I'm really wrong, and please don't suggest this to the government. But in my mind, I already know my grandmothers and my grandfathers are really interested in farming, so maybe we can take that and put that productive force into what we need to have as well. At the same time, we've stopped talking about lifespan, we're talking about health span, and how do we really maintain this system, this biological system, so that we can become stronger. There's going to be a lot of intervention, so health and kind of healthcare is going to be digitized. Those of you who admit to being in my age group will probably be the first persons who get augmented. Right? We're going to probably have, our eyesight will probably go off first. We might get some digital eyes in order to help us see. And that's going to improve the quality of our lives for a longer period of time. And so we'll be much more productive, we'll be much more active, and we'll definitely need some kind of support system from the food system. Yeah, and play a part in kind of solving these issues.
So Aoife, we talked about the social pieces. Older people need very specific things in their diet. Like, talk us through a little bit around what the aging population need from a diet perspective.
Sure, and look, this kind of starts from the age of 30 onwards. You need to think about this proactively. So from our 30s, we're losing our muscle mass at 5% each decade. And that's why then we might have less mobility. And that's why Linda was struggling with being able to play with her grandchildren. So by being conscious of that early in life and maintaining high protein and good physical activity, we can maintain that muscle mass so that we're able to get up and out of a chair, get in and out of bed, play with our grandchildren when we're older. We do have an increased requirement for protein to maintain that muscle mass. We don't want to lose it. That's called sarcopenia, when you lose your muscle mass. So higher protein in smaller portions is what we kind of mentioned. So I think there's a lot of room for innovation there, for creative ideas and how to maybe spread that throughout the day in maybe 6 small meals rather than three meals or whatever the routine is. Another nutritional requirement here is around our cognitive health and supporting that so that there's no cognitive decline. So omega-3s are really, really important for that. And then as well, fibre to help with gut motility to prevent any discomfort there. So they're the main things to consider when we're thinking about an older population.
I think there's a really interesting, like each of you have mentioned, well, innovation from your side and then opportunity from your side, because I think what's really kind of the cool part about having these aging populations is they represent a significant market share that has usually the lion's share of income, and sort of the intersection of a sustainable oriented economy and then a elderly focused economy is probably like one of the biggest business opportunities in the past, I don't know, 200 years. Like it's outside of war. But you know, I think those are such galactic shifts in terms of our populations, and they are not marketplaces that are really catered to or focused on yet. I know that there are massive studies ongoing into sort of what they're calling like the silver marketplace, but yeah, it's not a focus point for a lot of people. Everybody still wants to do young, sexy things and have ads for like really mobile people doing really cool stuff. And in some way that is advertising to older people, but I do think there's a massive market opportunity between sustainability and the elderly that someone just needs to zone in on and hit.
Okay, thanks, Lova.